All right. Hello, world. Thank you for coming to episode 7 of dWeb Chats with Migs on NFTs Are Stupid YouTube channel. I am joined today by somebody who I've been admiring quite a bit since the beginning of my journey with Handshake, which is Colin Burke. Goes by Blockdomains. That is his title on Twitter. HNS Worldwide, I think, is the handle. Everything will be in the description below, so we'll be able to connect with him very easily. But yeah, we're joined by Colin today. Colin, I appreciate you setting the time aside so much. It took a little bit of scheduling on my part and probably some scheduling on your part, but I'm excited to be hanging out with you. Of course, as always, at least for the beginning of the chat, we have Squeaky back there. I'm sure she'll disappear at some point throughout. That's kind of her thing. How you doing, Colin?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate you having me on, and this is a really cool series, and I'm excited about it. You know, its potential for Handshake. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I reached out to you honestly because when you had spoke at not spoke, you helped moderate a pretty important discussion at HandyCon. My memory is not great, so I'm going to have you clarify me in just a second. But I think it was HandyCon 2, if not HandyCon 3 for sure, that you kind of help moderate some sessions. You've been around Handshake since I can remember. You've taken the time to write a blog and to kind of keep up to date, really on the secondary market. I mean, Handshake's small today, but it was really small back then, and you've always kind of been on top of things. What? Let's start with the real basics. How did you get here? What brought you to Handshake? So what is our background? How did we get here?
Yeah, I mean, great question, and it was a lot of fortunate accidents, I guess. This seems like a pretty well-tread pathway in the Handshake community, but it was Stephen Mackay who ended up sort of like planting the seed for me. I am a normal guy, not really much of a tech background. I mean, let me re-clarify, not any sort of a tech background, besides like using Excel and PowerPoint at work. And during, once COVID heated up and people were indoors a lot of the time, I had more time to think about, hey, what's my, like, should I have a more active role in my investments and yada yada. And one thing led to another, and I haven't really traded much outside of my 401k in my life, and I'm 37, and ended up thinking, you know what, hey, I've got some free time and I've got some research and I'm willing to like pay for some experience in some cases, and from like pretty mainstream stocks, everything sort of like evolved, and I started looking at things that were less mainstream, and that led to me starting to look at public companies that had crypto interests, which to me seemed like the worst idea possible because they were mostly kind of scam artist sort of operations. But I appreciated the underlying sort of subject matter and wanted to learn more about it. And Twitter, I'd had an account for a bunch of years and never really logged on, and then started trying to learn more and came across some stuff that Stephen had put out there and some other people involved with Handshake, and it just kind of made sense. I have a background in commercial real estate. I was an English major, and domain names are neither of those things, but they are kind of part of those things. And it just made sense to me in a way that I'll make myself even less popular on Handshake here with this comment, but like I think that a lot of the crypto universe, not all of it, but a lot of the crypto universe is either ill-conceived or malconceived, I suppose. And that was Handshake was a part of the ecosystem that seemed very devoid of those indications and vibes, if I can say that, and seemed like an earnest, who knows where this is going to go, but like this isn't bullshit. And that got me interested, and I figured out, partly anyway, somewhat of a system to like, hey, certain things are underappreciated at auctions, but are more appreciated in the secondary market, and could make some money on that. And that tends to get one even more interested, and it's kind of just, been that from there, where it's an emerging asset class. Essentially, I think that like a lot of the .com and ICANN domains are really interesting, but I have no desire to go compete against a Michael Sager or an Elliot Silver or somebody who, and besides, like, I want to be upfront about this, and I think that people should be upfront about why they're into Handshake. And I'm sorry for the long answer, Alex, but people like, the number one thing I like about Handshake is my basis. I found it at the right time, and that's what makes me really interested about it. That's not the only thing, though. I believe in a lot of the core concepts that people have about digital sovereignty, about censorship resistance. At the same time, some of the potential manifestations of those things make me a little bit worried, even because, like in the current internet, we've got rules for a reason, so people can't, do terrible shit. So it's a balance. But anyway, that's kind of what got me interested in Handshake, and it just seemed like, wow, this is a great opportunity. And as I've gotten more and more into it, it's cool. It's fun. When I'm talking about it's for me, the buying and selling names, but also observing the technology, getting to meet new people, understanding the relationship with this ecosystem and the predecessor ecosystem and how they may cooperate in the future. And I really like a lot of the people who I've met. So that's much more in-depth answer than you were bargaining for. But that's kind of the 90-second version, we'll say, of how I got interested into Handshake.
I like every aspect of your answer. I'm going to try to remember as much of it as possible. My cache, my RAM is limited here, but no, I want to touch on a lot of those. I want to get deep into a lot of them. The first one that you mentioned, right, is that you're not a technologist, right? This stumbled by accident. In fact, COVID was actually a big time for me to start thinking about, how far my money can go rather than how effectively I can make it. So this chat isn't as much about me, but I think it helps to relate, right? I'm licensed in loans, right? To put it simple, right? And a lot of those real estate loans, because I believe that, real estate, particularly residential real estate, is the most personal type of asset that you can own, and the money that you deploy towards that asset is very, very personal as well. So I started thinking, okay, there's one thing to make money, it's another thing to how far your money can go. And that started that, when you're indoors a lot, you start thinking about things because, life is a contact sport. When you take out the contact, you go, well, I gotta think, at least for myself, I gotta think about something. So that got me thinking a lot about assets. And then I started, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that maybe you and I were along the same lines. It was like, all right, well, if I'm going to be thinking about my investments actively rather than passively, like a 401k, then I'm willing to up the risk a little bit if I can put some of my personality into this, right? Like, is that along kind of the same lines?
That's fair. It's if you're going to be active, I guess, as opposed to a passive. And I think it makes sense from like most of my money probably to be in a index fund or something. But like, if you're going to take the time, take the time. And at that point, everything was so volatile, and why not? Not investment advice.
Yeah, no, never definitely. We're not qualified for such a thing. But we can tell our story, and that was part of mine, right? And I think it was like, yeah, okay, there's everyone says diversify. Where's the fun, right? And for me, it was like, well, let's see if in this world of another thing you touched on, right? In this world of crypto, which is a mess. I've touched it before, and I've come in, I've come out, right? It's a mess, and it's always cutting edge information. That information might not even be positive technology information. It's just information. And who am I to be competing with some of those people, right? But in that world, let me see. I know that there's something valuable here. Let me see if somebody's using it for a good reason besides Bitcoin, which at the time was being highly manipulated anyway, right? So what who is using who is using decentralized blockchains, specifically proof of work blockchains, which I had to figure out what that meant, and who is using these things for something positive, because I know it's powerful and I know it's for more than pictures of, whatever you want to call them, right? So which by the way, I've said in other channels, I think NFTs are pretty cool, but I got your attention with the name. So besides pictures of things that can be traded, what can be done? And when I discovered Handshake, I thought the same thing. I said, wait a second, this is valuable. It's actually borderline tangible, right? I can actually take this offline. I can relate. There's a lot of properties here in the, again, real estate world for me that I can apply towards these digital assets. Many of them haven't been developed, and so sometimes people much wiser than I or much savvier than I, like Steven, in the space, would say, well, they have properties that could do all of these things, and I had to really like imagine them. But with time, I said, okay, fundamental properties I can understand. If you have this property, you can build on this. It's infrastructure. You can do all these things. So I came to a similar conclusion, kind of from looking for a similar thing, which I think makes a lot of sense. And then let's, again, I'm with you. Let's be very honest here. There's a lot of other things I could have been doing with my time. I do see value in Handshake assets, and the time that I got involved was also important. I said, I think I'm a pretty reasonable guy, right? But getting involved early has its merits and its benefits. So that's why I took it pretty seriously, because I realized these are a lot of smart people, many of which are smarter than me, and it's a pretty small pool. And I don't know if as an outsider maybe you felt the same way, but when I would see people like Steven or Kiva or some of the founders talk, I was like, there's got to be something here, even if I don't fully understand it yet.
Sure.
And then you touched on auctions and the secondary market and all of that. So naturally you gravitated towards that. What drove you to wanting to cover it? Because you did start a blog, and what made you so interested in assets besides just your own? Because you seem to be like a fan of the whole market.
So it's, I think that looking at, say, like the .com space or just the general ICANN space, and you've got a background that's in a similar industry to mine, so you kind of, I think we'll get this, but I think looking at like brokerage fees is pretty indicative of the efficiency of the market. And I mentioned, I apologize, this is the second time I'm mentioning Michael Seiger, who I think is a real gentleman and honestly kind of a genius when it comes to .com investment. And he's he's so generous with his time that he'll even respond to people like me on Twitter. So I don't even remember the context, but I'd asked him a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago about, like, why do people accept 15-20% brokerage fees for domain sales? And his response, which was right and what I expected, is that it's a less efficient market. And he said it's not as efficient as things like real estate. And to me, sometimes there are jokes that only I get, I suppose, which maybe makes them not jokes, but like when somebody says it's not as efficient as real estate, that's hilarious to me, because real estate is not like, come on. We're talking about in Resi world, 5% fees or 6% fees. My background's mostly in commercial, where things tend to be a little bit lower, but not, best I can tell, more efficient. So it's you've got this dynamic, and then you see other, less kind of like public facing people in the ICANN world, compared to Mr. Seiger or whoever else, who are very close to the vest when it comes to, here's what I paid for it, here's what I sold it for, and that's their prerogative. There's no, hey, I understand the reason to do that. And I think that especially in domain sales, there's this perception in the end user, which is really the like desired client and .com and the premier space, that the end user is going to say, well, what'd you pay for it? Well, I'm going to give you 5% above that. You should be happy with that. And if somebody, told you that with like a house or an office building, you'd say, well, here's where to stick it. Like it's a ridiculous thing, but at the same time, there's not the same. And I'm not an expert in this stuff, but like domains are just a younger industry. It's what are we, 30 years into, if that, into most people in the US at least having an internet connection. Obviously there have been changes where search engine policies and algorithms have in some cases like taken the wind out of the updraft of that market, but like by and large it seems, there's a long-winded way of saying that it seems like a market that is incredibly stifled by the lack of information. And if you're going to do something better, and you're going to actually love to talk with you a little bit about this more, but if you're going to do Web3 or dWeb or whatever we're calling it, if you're going to do it better. And if you're going to do it better, have more transparency. And a big part of that to me is that there is such a disconnect. Like, of course, there are going to be any market. There are going to be wholesalers. There are going to be middlemen. There are going to be intermediaries. There are going to be whatever. But the cut that group is taking, the upcharge from wholesale to retail, the fact that there is a wholesale market in domains, all of those things don't make sense to me. And I don't know. I don't consider myself an unsophisticated person. It seems to me like it's a market that hasn't, even though, like I said, it's young, it hasn't developed the way that it should have or the way that it could. And I think there's a lot of like agency problems with that, because you have people who, say you're some guy that in 1998 bought a great portfolio of domain names. You've been selling some, you've been renewing some. You don't want to give out your secret sauce to somebody else. You don't want to make the market more efficient, because just like I said a few minutes ago, it's a basis play. And I don't begrudge anybody that. But if you're going to go ahead and try to make a new internet, well, shoot, might as well try to make sales data more transparent. I can't like take really credit for that, because the fact that blockchains exist, like that's an inherent boost to transparency right off the bat. The fact that the largest market for domain names in secondary market anyway, for Handshake domain names in Namebase, the fact that those transactions aren't on chain, I honestly think is kind of a detriment to Handshake, and something that is a credibility and transparency reducer. But anyway, like I'm not anywhere near as consistent as I should be with blogging, even with like putting stuff out on Twitter or speaking on conferences or at conferences. But I want data to be out there, and I want, frankly, like if I can contribute anything, it's that I put out a chart and somebody smarter than me and more ambitious than me reads it and says like, yeah, okay, interesting, but this guy's looking at it the wrong way, so I'm going to redo it, because that's the best thing for Handshake to get. Like, so I don't know. I view myself a little bit as like the straw man who's fumbling through it and trying to figure out the best ways to collect and present data. But I'm doing it with the aspiration that it's a starting point for a broader group of people, because I don't have a secret sauce. I don't have some like secret plan to monetize data that I share that I haven't disclosed yet. I just want a more efficient market, because I think that when it, like, again, what's my motivation and my perspective, and I believe in a lot of stuff about Handshake, but I also really like selling TLDs for more than I paid for them. And that's a lot easier when there's data out there to justify that other people are paying similar prices or valuing those assets similarly.
Yeah, that let's see. First of all, yes, the domain market is so unique in that it has properties that humans value, kind of like real estate, and they can travel so much better. They can travel, real estate can't, and other characteristics like that. But because of its because of how abstract of an asset class it is, it does make it difficult. And you touched on something really interesting with the search engines and what their impact on domain names and maybe the value of a recognizable domain name. Because you can add so many things to a domain name now to make it recognizable, with algorithms. But But I think it is important to know, what is the true value of a domain name, because it is, and what is the market doing in residential finance. We look at appraisals, right? We look at comps, and things like that, and it's hugely influential. When somebody's serious about purchasing something, they want to know, of course they want to know what you paid for it, but they also, I think after a certain amount of time, they accept that, I wasn't there when you paid for it. I'm here now. And so I need to be realistic with the circumstances, and comps and information are going to be crucial. And something else that you had touched on is that the open blockchain, right, is particularly Handshake in its design, as a fork of Bitcoin/Bitcoin, right, is very open on information, but that doesn't make it easy to figure out, particularly for somebody like me or you, right, to be able to figure it out. Somebody on a more technical level with a lot of block explorer experience may be in a better position to find that information. But again, that's a very small market, which, limited buyers and sellers that have access to all of that know what to do with it and are interested, and there's a lot more domain names than that. So being able to have something to reference makes a lot of sense. Also, this is going to be I compliment you on being willing to put that information out. I operate very, very similarly in that I understand that my version of this won't be the best, but I want to demonstrate to somebody out there who might be better at it that I'm out here doing it, which gives it credibility, gives Handshake credibility in itself. It is important. And hopefully somebody is much better with a much bigger marketing budget and a much better access to people, right, that will put on a better Handshake show, right, and introduce it to more people, for example, right. And that's the whole goal here. Because my assets are mine and I care about them, and I want to, some of them I want to monetize, some of them I want to build on. But more importantly, right, I do want this ecosystem to grow because I believe it has merit, and there's things out there that have less merit, right, and that have a higher market share, and that I would like to balance that equilibrium as much as I can. So I think I can definitely identify with you on that front. And also, I'll shout Michael out as well. He's done very well for, he's very successful generally in terms of likability, and I'm sure, specifically in his career within what he does, and he still has had an ear to the ground with Handshake as long as I can remember. And I think that's a big, heads up play by a professional in his own field, in the general field. So
I agree.
good thoughts on that. Do you any thoughts on that specifically, or do you mind if we pivot a little bit?
No. Why don't we go ahead and pivot? Take me wherever you want to go.
Yeah, well, I think that you and I may, and always correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you and I may have come to a similar conclusion that, like, okay, domains are really cool in general. But I am not going to be competing with some of these Web2 people. Like, I'm not going to mortgage my house to be able to buy one domain to try to compete in the Web2 world. Whereas in this, in this Handshake world, maybe because I have studied it a little bit, maybe because I learned how auctions work, what a blind is, what, how to reveal, right, those types of things. Maybe because of that, I might have an opportunity to what we would call in the Web2 world hand register some domains that could have some inherent value in the future, right, or some appeal. And I take it that you have also been a part of auctions. A lot of people, coming into Handshake today maybe don't. Maybe they just associate Handshake with the secondary market. But I'm guessing you opened a couple domains. You had to follow them. Maybe you lost some sleep over some auctions ending. What was that experience like? Any thoughts, opinions?
No, that was, and you're gonna potentially need to cut me off even more than usual here, because I've got a lot of thoughts on the auction world, and I think I was like a lot of people where I, learned it the hard way, in terms of, really be conservative, or, I'm giving advice to my past self here, I suppose, but really be conservative with the number of auctions that you open. I've had some like pretty unseemly exchanges on Discord and whatever else about there was, for a while, it seems to have died down a little bit, but for a while there was the open an auction, bid whatever your highest potential bid is, and then go to sleep at night. And I think that that's, for like a small slice of people, really good advice. But I think for most people, based on what I perceive them to be trying to do in Handshake, it's pretty cruddy. Because what would end up happening when I followed that advice was, okay, well, I'm going to go and open this bid with 40 HNS, this one with 200 HNS, this one with whatever. And what ends up happening is you lose all of them. If their name's worth going after, you end up losing all of them or most of them. Whereas the thing that I think people don't talk about enough when it comes to the auctions, I'm assuming for the purposes of this conversation that most people out there are similar to situation I've been in, where it's like you want to accumulate domains, you want to accumulate good domains for good prices, and you want to do it within a certain amount of time. And that inherent, like, the more time you take, the fewer domains will be available. That was especially pertinent during the first 52 weeks of Handshake. But honestly, I've been pretty surprised and amazed with some of the stuff that's coming out of drop. And I don't know if people lose their keys. I don't know if people have died even or whatever. But like some of the names that have come back to auction are pretty darn good names, and the market has responded accordingly as far as bid volume. But anyway, like, you've got finite resources and finite time. And when you make a bid, that's, I believe, so say you open the auction with that bid, that's 5 days of the auction plus another 10 days for that bid to be refunded. If you blind that amount, or if you just open a bid with a smaller amount, well, if you open the bid with a smaller amount, it's the same thing, just a smaller amount. If you open the bid with a blind, you're getting that back pretty much immediately after the auction ends. And the hard lesson, and actually I have Kiba to thank for this, because I messaged him and I don't even know how it really came up, but like, just bid at the end. And I know there's a lot of, like scorn directed towards snipers and stuff like that, but like, get over it. I mean, that's just like, if you're trying to accumulate as many names as possible with finite amount of HNS, blind really light at the beginning, see who's serious, see where you're competitive. And it doesn't mean that somebody else isn't going to come out of the woodwork and snipe you right back for that name you didn't think, but like, you're at least not throwing bad money after good. And yes, you get the money back, but liquidity, especially during that first year of Handshake, but even now, I mean, it's a down market. People aren't making as much. Like, liquidity is king. You just want to have the dry powder to be able to go and bid. And I kind of learned that the hard way. The blessing of that was that I don't think I was very good at choosing domain names to open bids on at the beginning. So it was a little bit of a blessing in disguise. There was one point where I went to, I think they're called AOCs or ADCs in the European Union, where you have like designated places where like champagne's only from Champagne, that sort of thing. I went to the Wikipedia page. I can't even say it. I went to the Wikipedia page for like all of the designated wine producing regions in France. And you've got accent marks, you've got, all sorts of non-Latin characters that are turning into Punicode territory. But anyway, and this was before I even realized how to do like bulk searches on Namebase. So I was going through one for one, bidding on all these like essentially worthless domains that some of them don't even really like, display correctly, or they've got funky characters. So the blessing was that some of the stuff that I was like, oh man, like, nobody better see me, get in on this early, was like, if somebody had seen me, they would have been laughing at me, because like, what's this guy wasting his time with? So it was good news that, over a little bit of time, figured out how to actually more, successfully win and be competitive in auctions. And also just like, there are a lot of, even early on, there was this active secondary market, and emoji, for better or for worse, seemed to be one of the early things. And sometimes it was single emoji, sometimes it was like, emoji combinations that were pretty juvenile, frankly, but like, whatever, let me buy some of those, hang on to some in some cases, but sell some of those, because that allows me to get a much better portfolio. Because the thing that was really kind of a bummer when I was starting out, and oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the gentleman who has one of the better portfolios and websites, who's a European based guy, but like I didn't have the dictionary words. And like that, if Handshake ever goes the way of .com or anything resembling it, like, yeah, smiley face, like that's awesome. All this stuff is awesome. But like, for better or for worse, English language is the language of global commerce, and single word, single syllable. Let me get something with. So like you know, uh, once I had sold some domains, tried to plow some stuff back into like single word type stuff. So I own like .beach, which I've staked at Namebase, and has done, good, not great as far as selling subdomains. But it was sort of a like, well, you know what, like how many municipalities in America are named something beach? And that alone, like, so it's just, there's something extra when it comes to, short, like, I don't know, you can find a lot of words in the dictionary, obviously, and some of them are, you don't even need them on the SATs or whatever. But for real common, succinct, popular words, that was kind of always the holy grail for me. So the auction strategy, where it was a little bit of like a bootstrap exercise, was a little bit of a way for me to get to the stuff that I couldn't really afford in the first place, or at least in the case of like something like beach or some, other good single words, like there was just so much risk associated with, because it was every week, right? So there's so much risk associated with like, let me put my whole liquid stack of HMS on this thing and I'm going to lose it. And like, then I might actually lose it because I'm so upset about it. So it was kind of just a like portfolio enhancement strategy, but it's been interesting to see. Like, I think there's a learning curve for everybody for the auctions, and it's not necessarily intuitive. And one thing that I've gotten kind of yelled at in the ecosystem before is saying, and I'll say it again anyway, but it's not actually a Vickrey auction. It's a good approximation of a Vickrey auction, but like in a true Vickrey auction, there's no blind construct. There's no, here's your total lockup. Whereas in Handshake, if somebody's total lockup is 300, if you bid 301 and they don't get another bid in, that means you're the winner. That means you're going to take home that domain. And there's no analogous path to victory, if I can call it that, in a true Vickrey auction, like you'd see for whatever, Spectrum that the FCC is auctioning or something like that. There's no analog to that. So I think that in some cases, some people have been tripped up because you do have academic research into Vickrey auctions, but I think it's honestly pretty misapplied in the case of Handshake, because for technical reasons, it wasn't possible to do a true, like, the blind was necessary to have the system remain lightweight and whatever. That's how I understand the white paper. But it like, when somebody knows they can bid the Price is Right +1, sort of thing, that just opens up a whole new avenue of human nature. And so anyway, auctions are fun. I've been on the wrong side probably more times than I've been on the right side. But it's definitely been a, like, you talked about losing sleep before. I'm grateful to remain married in spite of my dedication to getting Handshake domains. So I guess that's probably the best way to say it.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, people do not understand. I don't even know if things go amazing, if even then they'll understand. But you touched on a couple things. I'm always grateful for the one name I won, which was my last name. I won it 100% by accident. I had no idea what was going on. I just typed it in, and a week later I got, or whatever time later, I got an email from Namebase being like, you got Migleranium. I don't know what that means. And then I figured it out quickly soon after. It was pretty cool. But I did not get sniped on that one. But from then, there's a learning curve. It takes experience, unfortunately, and it is interesting. There's definitely a couple hacks, right? Like the sniping hack. Things like Namebases increase minimum bid amounts. I think that makes it a little bit more interesting. You don't have as many random names being opened up for nothing. But but the auctions in themselves, they take a minute to understand. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I appreciate Johnny Woo's videos on explaining what a blind was. I still had to watch it 7 times, but I got it after a while.
Yeah.
And eventually I was like, okay. And you're right, you can. And there have been times where I'm like, you know what? I'm not gonna mess around and find out if this person's blinding or not. And I'm doing, it's 200. I'm doing 201. It just is what it is. I want to win, right? And that has happened. I've also, you also, to your point, you can't deploy a bunch of capital unless you're sure and unless you're taking a look at the clock, because you might deploy all your capital and now you're not bidding on any names for a while and you lost all of them, and you're waiting quite a while to get that money back. So, and it puts you out of the game. And you were in there during the. I think it's important to note, you said the 52 weeks because there was 52 weeks at the beginning of Handshake when names were still becoming available to bid on, right? I came in during a portion of that, and a lot of them were already there. So you were earlier than I was, and you had also mentioned something else, which was the secondary market, and that's what I could never figure out that secondary market in the early days. I was like, why did you bother to open this auction and win this name if you're going to be selling it at this price? I'm just going to camp out here for a minute. There were so many great deals on the secondary market, early on, and there still are, which baffles me,
Right.
considering the price of Handshake. And maybe that's some people forgetting what they've listed them for. But the secondary market has always been very, very interesting, almost as interesting, at least as in my opinion, as interesting as the auctions. The auctions were exciting, but you knew that people's eyes were going to be on them sooner or later. If not during the week, then they would be there at the last couple of hours, right? And you had to compete with those people. Secondary market was interesting because it kind of became a one-on-one battle, with the offers and things like that. And sometimes you didn't even have to offer. The prices were just so appealing that I would take an opportunity on them. All of this mostly happening on Namebase, which you had mentioned earlier, right? Namebase is a centralized exchange. And you can buy Handshake tokens. You can also buy and sell names. They have increased the commission from 3% to 10%, making people think a little bit more, when they want to purchase a name on the secondary market. But with that said, the transactions are not on chain. And so, but what I will give Namebase a lot of credit for recently is they have facilitated the ability to navigate your names on and off of the platform and kind of have a little bit more control. And so I've been seeing, I've been able to find more information on a name. Now that they're offline, I've been able to move my own names off, and back online. Actually, people have, requested them, and I said, we can work on it, through the platform. So it has its benefits. They've also been really responsive with the customer service, but there are days when, particularly early on, when I was like, I'm pretty invested in this, emotionally, as my friends and family know, and financially, is it all hinging on this, this platform? And the answer is yes, and it still is yes, actually.
Yeah. It's tricky. Namebase has done a lot for the Handshake ecosystem, but part of the point of the Handshake ecosystem is that a single party like Namebase isn't going to be in the driver's seat, or at least not to the extent. And to his credit, I think that Richard at Namecheap, once they bought Namebase, like that's been his attitude, in terms of communication. Like, we want to be a player, but we don't expect to be the only player in this market. It's there. I think the inertia is just pretty great, and I know you're the one doing the interview here, but something I've been thinking about a lot recently is, and we touched on this a little bit with censorship resistance, with the potential utility of Handshake domains, whether they're TLDs or SLDs, but I oftentimes find myself going back to what's the end game? What's the point? And sorry, I left out a bunch of stuff, the fact that somebody can get a TLD without a 200 large application fee, period, to ICANN, that they then have to bid on top. There is a lot there, but I guess when it comes to, the reason I'm putting it this way is because if decentralization, maybe decentralization isn't the biggest selling point, or maybe it isn't for everybody. And does that make Handshake being on name base less of a big deal? I take the viewpoint of sort of the optionality of decentralization is great. Like you were mentioning, the ability, you can have something on name base and then take it off of there. And I think that that kind of suits the needs. I know that the obvious counter argument to that is, that ability exists until it doesn't. And what if SEC or whoever decides that name base is their next target and shuts them down? But I guess like that's something that I think about a lot and honestly struggle with in terms of like what's the reason for existence, what's the ultimate justification. And I think that like that the answer to that affects how one might view the primacy of name base in the ecosystem, if that all makes sense.
It does. It does. I think it does. It takes having thought about Handshake for a while, and nor do I claim to be an expert on this, but I put a lot of Meg's brain power behind it for what it's worth. And there's a couple conclusions I've come to. Number one is I wish I had done more research on Namecoin up until now, but I've been spending all my time on Handshake. But if it wasn't for something like Namebase existing and making it so user friendly, you and I probably wouldn't exist, right? And the protocol needed something that facilitated use, and Namebase more than accomplished that goal. Like I think we'll look back on it and be like, wow. Particularly with all the things that rolled out early on. Right, and I think the shift in leadership has been good for the whole protocol, right? Because clearly it wanted to happen, so it happened, and I agree with you that Richard's ability, direction with it has been additive, right, for the whole ecosystem. But Namebase, in terms of why, well, I think it had to exist. I think Tayshaun had a really good vision, right, and took like take opportunity isn't it, but he harnessed an opportunity that was there and really did a lot with it, right? And to the whole original team. Now next, my thesis has always been it's only going to take a couple TLDs for Handshake to grow, right? To hit a next level. And I have theories on what's going to drive that, but it's only going to take a couple TLDs, just like the .coms only took a couple TLDs. If you look back at the early 2000s, the late 90s, there were a couple guys who said, I don't want to own a .com. I want to own I want to own the .com, right? And they went after getting their own TLDs again. And so that I think is inherent to the nature of like of some individuals, some entrepreneurial, tech individuals, that they want to own their own TLD. But even with that, the .coms won. And so back to that, and only a couple other things, and it took like 20 years for .io to even be a thing. So it's only going to take a couple TLDs. If those TLDs are going to become something, they're going to become something because of the characteristics of Handshake that make it different than our current .com ecosystem. And the thing that makes it different is censorship resistance via decentralization. But it's the censorship resistance that's going to push it. And you had touched on this earlier. Again, this is just my opinion, but somebody's going to say, this is uncensorable. Therefore, I'm going to build on it because whatever I do would usually be censored or has already been censored, right? And I, it's not a fun thing to talk about. People don't want to hear it, but that is the fact. The characteristic of this that makes it unique, right? Just like nuclear power can make a nuclear bomb, right? Is that the censorship resistant. Why does it work? Because it's on a decentralized blockchain. Who's going to use it? The person who wants to leverage that characteristic. And that person probably kind of like using Bitcoin for the Silk Road, right? It wasn't because Bitcoin was like, easy to use by any means in 2012, right? But it was functional for the purposes of running something like the Silk Road, marketplace. And somebody will leverage a Handshake TLD for the same purposes sooner or later, successfully or unsuccessfully, and they'll definitely be doing it off of something like Namebase, right? And I think that'll be a big next step for Handshake, and it'll probably be a dark time in terms of public sentiment. But that'll be big, and there's a large probability that if Handshake becomes something that strong government agencies or powerful players just in the ICANN space see as a threat, that Namebase will be under fire. That's just the way of things. Just like every centralized crypto exchange I've seen is under fire in some capacity or another, no matter how ethical they are.
Yeah.
So those are all my thoughts. I've thought about them in all sorts of directions, and it doesn't deter me from being invested because it doesn't. In fact, if something is that powerful, then that kind of actually makes me more interested in understanding why it exists. But what you had mentioned earlier, that you think the censorship resistance is a big part of this. What are your thoughts? How do you think about my being too am I getting too dark? Am I what do you think?
I'm honestly still trying to make my mind up, which is a crazy thing to be saying, whatever, 3 years into my journey here, if I can call it that. I think that there's an element for me that, so within the ICANN space, .com was kind of the ball game for a bit, and 100% market share of domain names back from when there were 10 of them, what have you. And that's like, since other extensions, top level domains are possible, that sort of inherently puts them, there's only one direction that they can go as far as market share. And everybody I've ever interacted with at Namebase has been great. Sometimes institutionally, they do things that make me a little bit crazy, and actually, well, correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I believe that they still use the why own a.com when you can own a TLD language with some of their marketing, like if you share a link to a domain on Twitter. And I wish so badly that they wouldn't, because I just think it's like, especially as they've transitioned into selling SLDs, how is owning a .com domain different than owning a Handshake SLD? And like, more to the point, let's be real. .com is not going anywhere, not in the near future, not in the working lifetime of me, probably, or lifetime period. They're going to continue to be widely utilized. They're going to continue to be valuable assets. I would go so far as to say that I'd be surprised if they didn't continue to be sort of like the gold standard as far as trustworthiness and whatever else you want to say as far as domains go. So like, let's get that right out of there. But at the same time, other extensions have just inherently, because the market has grown more so than because .com has shrank, other extensions have picked up steam. And I was trying to find this the other day actually and failed, but somebody in Web 2 world or ICANN domain world had shared a chart maybe a few months ago. It was looking at TechCrunch listed companies, what their primary domain extension was. And .com over time was losing market share, relative to .io, pick a newfangled extension. So there's a part for me, and I mentioned before, and this is liability more than an asset in most lines of work. But I mentioned before I was an English major, and like, you know what? Like, part of what I really like about Handshake is just cool fucking names. You don't have to shoehorn in some domain hack into one of the 1,000 or whatever extensions that exist. If there's something out there, and granted, not everything's being offered for SLD sales, not everything's available to purchase, or some people that want to hold on to things or don't respond to offers, whatever. But like I was saying with .beach before, and I'm sorry for pumping my own tires so much, but like, shit, there's so many towns in America and other places in English-speaking world that are named whatever beach. And you know what? Like, maybe it's something that I don't know what I think even. So I don't know if I can even say if I'm right or not. But like, the idea that you can just have exact match names for whatever you want more easily, and against the backdrop even within the ICANN world, where non.com names are becoming more normalized and more commercially viable, or more viable for whatever kind of reputable uses people want to do, to me, that's at least a part of it. I guess I just don't know how big of a part of it is. And I tend to agree with you that, like, is what I just said big enough to do a whole new everything?
Yeah.
No, I don't really think so. I think that the stuff you were saying before about censorship resistance, and I think that like, that's a much more legitimate justification. I also, and this is a conversation that could last a long time probably, but like, as we're looking at sort of like what's happening from a regulatory standpoint in America, and I don't want to say there goes the world, but like, they're going to be a market leader in terms of, things will follow. And frankly, I'm a little bit surprised with how, like, shotgun of an approach we've seen things play out over the last week or two, because I was of the mindset, and I think a lot of people were, of like, hey, like, regulation, like, let's be real, we're adults, like, things get regulated, like, it happens, but at least you have the clarity, at least you have the roadmap. And I guess I've been anticipating, for as long as I've kind of gotten to know a little bit about crypto, that it's going to be, the on-ramps and the off-ramps that get regulated, the Coinbases and stuff. I didn't expect that it was going to be sort of how it's been playing out in the last week or so, where like, hey, everything you're doing is illegal, but more of a like, hey, everybody gets a 1099. So but anyway, I guess I wonder, when it comes to the censorship resistance, if somebody's going to be monetizing a Handshake asset, whether that's through selling it, whether that's through using it for a revenue producing purpose, is there always going to be sort of like somebody with a net, at the end of the path, saying, all right, scoop you right up? Because I guess I just wonder, like, the viability long term of the censorship resistance. I think that there are a lot of reasons, and like, there are a lot of people with money that want stuff on the internet that is going to stay there and be immutable and there for. And frankly, I admire that, in most cases anyway. There are people that do that for the wrong reasons. But is that enough to sustain or to justify because for Handshake to be adopted in a widespread way that's going to bring more usability, that causes a lot of disruption for the existing order and for all kinds of things. Does that justify it? And it's not about whether it does in my mind, but in the minds of VeriSign and in the minds of Congress. And not to make it such a big deal, but like, that's kind of like, how viable, if people are going to try to make money off of Handshake, is a censorship resistance going to get snagged at some point? And I've seen some interesting, and honestly, some of it's way over my head, but like, in the Bitcoin community and sort of like the hardcore, digital sovereignty community, it seems like there are some conversations about, like, where are we going with technology that, yes, like, this will be possible in the future. It'll be possible to peer-to-peer transact. It'll be possible to whatever. But is that only going to be accessible to like a couple hundred people in the world, because the hoops that you have to go through to avoid regulatory whatever are so severe? So I wonder about that. I want to be clear, I have no answers or predictions about that, but like, that's in the like what literally keeps me up at night sometimes camp, as I'm thinking about Handshake and its purpose and its future.
Yeah. So a couple things I'm going to run through real quick. Number one, .com is not going anywhere. You're absolutely right. But by the same token, if you could restart the internet all over again, and I guarantee you, if it was like 1995, right, or earlier, but really, let's say 97, and people are freaking out about domain names, they wanted to get personal domain names, just like all the crazy ones that we opened up and saw being opened up in auction, right? Like that is human nature. .com came out of a power struggle, right? And it won. And so people, adopted .com. It wasn't because everyone thought .com was awesome, right? Like, or whatever. Like people would have all sorts of dots if they could. And that's what makes Handshake super interesting. One of the facets of it that makes it really interesting is the thought. But with that said, it's not going anywhere. And I think that even as Handshake gains maybe adoption, credibility will be more and more veered towards the .coms. I fully see a world where they go, if you're sending me to a non.com, a non.io, I don't want to talk to you because you're probably up to something questionable. And I fully see that world. The censorship resistance, I think, will be what makes Handshake known, right? It'll be what makes it interesting. Like a lot of other technologies, it'll be like, what can you do with it? Not what should you do with it. What can you do with it? So I think that its censorship resistance will be what breaks it through into the next like precipice, right? Where it won't be like a bunch of us fans trying to get people into it, but it'll kind of, something will make it hit the news. And I think it'll be through censorship resistant. In the future, if Handshake becomes readily adopted and used, it will be because of its characteristics of identity and its security that's built into it. The ability to sign a cryptographic signature with your digital identity and to be able to own that identity, right? And to have that identity travel from platform to platform with you, right? And effectively plug into like an API, right? Like your name can sign a contract here, it can receive money here, it can do this thing here, it can do that thing here, and it's all tied to you, which is anchored by the root zone, which is anchored by a proof of work blockchain that can't be argued, just like Bitcoin, and that's pretty powerful. Because I also think that Bitcoin will become a reference to verifying historical events and data, right? Like, was there, this transaction really, rather than being a transaction of value, will signify an event, right? That I think that Bitcoin will become that. It'll become like the most trusted timeline in history at some point. And Handshake will have the ability to do that, but tied to an identity, not just like a token. And there's arguments that Bitcoin can just take care of that as well. Like a Bitcoin maxi will tell us that we don't need Handshake. Those are a couple quick thoughts there. And then you had touched on some other ones. Which see, this is the problem. I try to keep up with you. It's hard. But you had.
Sorry, I go on for a while, so you're excused.
Okay, and the other thing is that also those identities will also become kind of like an email platform, which I think will be very very important as well. Which I don't know how to go about that, but I don't think censorship resistance will be the only thing. I think the other thing is, I don't think that you're wrong to consider that regulation will be a reality and that these will be perceived as maybe not. No, I'm going to use the word threats to either businesses or lawmakers or rule makers or people that regulators, I guess is the word I'm looking for. It will be. And like a quick story, my rabbit hole here. I was introduced to Bitcoin, I think the year was 2011 or 2012. I was working at the Apple store, and somebody who worked at the Genius Bar. I did not yet work at the Genius Bar. One day flashed a flash drive at me and said, like, I just bought 90 Bitcoin or something like that. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, bro. And on my lunch break, I went home and Googled, just for the sake of it. I hopped on YouTube, and there were some crazy guys, and they're like, all right, you get your Bitcoin, and then you're gonna engrave it in these tablets. You're gonna put these tablets away, and you put it away, and you put some away for your grandkids and for these people because of this and because of that and because of that, and because it's gonna be not just valuable, but it's also gonna be this because it, whatever. And I say whatever because I immediately closed the laptop. And I was like, I'm going to eat something, go back to school or go back to work. And they were not wrong, right? It sounded absolutely space alien bananas at the time, right? And I wanted it to be true, but I just said, clearly you don't understand that everything can be hacked, my friend. You're nuts, right? And the guy was old. Whatever perspective of old was, now I'm older, so I wouldn't call him old today. But at the time, I was like, you had to learn the internet. I grew up with the internet. I was like, I sell iPhones. I sell the internet. You don't know what you're talking about, right? And I closed the computer and I went about my way. He's been right about everything he's ever said in that video. It just the threat is at first it's all space aliens, right? And then after some time, you go, okay, well, if these properties are true, the same reason I believe that this is valuable is the same reason that somebody else is going to find it threatening. And I think that what you're suggesting is true, right? Somebody might not see a handshake name as a friendly thing in the future. They might see it as a threat. They might see it as like an act of rebellion, or or anarchy, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that's going to play. I think it's really far away. I think a lot of the people that are in the space today might not be in it by the time that reaches, if it ever does.
Yeah.
And we'll see how it plays. But there's a possibility that Handshake will be villainized, like Bitcoin is, is in some circles. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a real fair take, and I appreciate you talking how you did about the identity aspect, because I was sort of ignoring that, and I think that that's honestly one of the more compelling potential use cases for Handshake. The sort of like, somebody know that you are you. It's a portable sovereign identity, and that's, I think, a very powerful thing, especially in the age that we've entered into of, everything's a spoof or a hoax or a phishing scam or whatever. I'm interested with, and I think that, like, and again, I want to be honest about my biases. Like, I would love it if Handshake has a future where Fortune 500 companies want their Handshake PLDs or their SLDs under certain extensions, as the case may be. And, that's like, that'd be great. I sell domains. I stay away from, like, branded stuff, but like that has a overall positive effect. But one of the things that's really interesting, and well, interesting maybe isn't the right word, but like, intellectual property is a huge deal when it comes to Handshake. It's a huge deal when it comes to everything, I guess. But like, from the legitimacy standpoint, and especially considering that in the Web 2 world, there are gatekeepers, right? The VeriSigns of the world, or the very established brokers of the world, who might not want to be involved with a Web3 program unless that's the Web3 program in which they invested in the Series A, for instance. That sort of thing. And like, hey, everybody's putting food on the table. I don't really begrudge it. But I guess there's a censorship resistance if somebody has content that somebody doesn't like, but it's not illegal per se, or it's not nefarious. I struggle a little bit with how does intellectual property get enforced without kind of selling the whole farm, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Like, how do you have that backdoor or grab, snatch, whatever ability, if somebody, because I tend to be of the mindset that, like, and I think that the Handshake developers were enlightened in terms of setting aside the Alexa top 100,000. I also, like, of course that's not perfect. There are a lot of I mentioned the Fortune 500 before. I haven't gone down the list, but like, there are Fortune 500 companies that are not in the top 100,000 Alexa search terms, because they're more business to business type things that aren't really consumer facing. And I think it's bad for Handshake, and it's bad for the people that Handshake proponents like ourselves want to convince to become advocates as well. If Apple's reserved, but if like .apple were out there, or you see on the marketplace all the time, probably the same as I do, somebody's selling like .apple phone, and I don't know, frankly, if that should be. I've gotten some pretty enthusiastic pushback before by suggesting that Namebase should, kibosh trademark terms, or at least have some kind of filter, kibosh alternate puny code for emoji. And some of the feedback that I've gotten where I broached that in the ecosystem has been, well, that's censorship. That's not what Handshake's about. And I kind of think that's a pretty feeble retort. I'm biased, but like, I also don't know, though, if it is the right place for Namebase to be doing that. They are kind of the market maker right now, and that could legitimize a lot of things. It could also, amazed all the time about some of the I'm not trying to be critical, but like of some of the political attitudes I see expressed in the crypto world. So, I guess I'm a little bit scared to be saying like that somebody should have this ability to do something. But I like this is the real world, and we want like if I guess part of my mindset is that if Handshake's going to be available to do sovereign identity and censorship resistance and have the robustness to accomplish those things, have a network of miners that are interested in, yada yada. I guess part of my mindset is that that doesn't happen without at least some degree of commercial adoption as well, just because like the money's got to come from somewhere. So I guess balancing the goals of the first group in terms of censorship resistance with the goals of the second group, like, hey, I don't want my IP legitimately squatted on. That's a really tough, circle of square as far as I'm concerned. And I don't, like we were saying earlier, I hope people smarter than I are working on it. But it's a hard thing. But I also acknowledge that I might be in the minority when it comes to my vision of commercial adoption, I should say, for Handshake, that big companies and the like are going to use it. I think that that's a good thing overall, but I can understand interpretations that kind of conclude differently.
Yeah. So I'm very much of the, first of all, when it comes to the political thing, one of the names I will always regret not being able to obtain was apolitical, because I tried to identify that way and I thought it would be an amazing name to own. And I remember, I don't know if I almost bought it on the secondary and I just didn't have money that day or if I lost the auction. But that aside, real quick, I think if Handshake's adopted, I think that there will still be a TLD that rules, or a few TLDs that rule, and people will register their SLD on that TLD. I don't think that, I really just don't see, I don't see, I think .apple, I don't see everybody acquiring their own TLD. Is one thing I don't see. The other thing and I also think we have to, I think it's important for, I try to put myself in the perspective of we're in a very unique time where the dissemination of the names is happening. The distribution of the names is happening right now. That will not always be the case, right? It will not always be the case. Bitcoin was mined 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes for a long time, right? For 4 years, and then 25, and that's huge inflation compared to where we're at today. Today, Bitcoin is not, people aren't as obsessed with the miners unless you're a big operation. It's more about the distribution and the exchanging of the Bitcoin, right? That's its main function in today's society, is representing value in times, in moments, right? And so once the names get out there, we'll see what plays and what gets adopted. I think that one thing that Handshake is very poised to start disrupting is platforms are beginning to overreach. They could be social media platforms. It could be, today in the news, it's Reddit. Other days, it could be Twitter, right? And in other situations, it could be YouTube, right? The same platform that this video is going to go up on, right? But platforms, it could be Instagram, right? Trying to say you're verified, but you're not verified because we said so, because you have paid, you have not paid, right? Some platforms have had a massive central amount of power and authority, and have the ability to kind of bend users to their will. And if users are able to have their identities travel, similar to the way that Blue Sky is offering, right, an emerging platform that, in my opinion, isn't getting the adoption that was anticipated. But if that trend continues, right, if Blue Sky is ahead of its time, the way that Twitter was, then platforms are going to have to start accommodating to the user. And that might change things a little bit. So I touched on one thing. One is that I think SLDs will still be king. Possibly a decentralized SLDs, but probably not. Probably centralized SLDs like .beach, right? Or more centralized SLDs. That's one thing. The other thing is that once people harness the identity, it'll be less about acquiring identities and more about, like, I have an identity, now I build on it, right? I build on Mig's machine. Right, Mig's machine.beach. Like, now Mig's machine.beach is truly my identity, and I'm going to hold on to it for 15 years, the way that I've held on to my email for 15 years. And right, my email, I don't think about the fact that it's a at Gmail all the time. I just think, like, okay, I can communicate with any other email on the planet, regardless of who they use, right? Because we speak a language, then that language is portable from platform to platform. So Handshake has the properties for that to happen. It's very, very, very far away. Right now, the obsession is with the ownership of the actual identities, right? Tomorrow, if it's adopted by the common person or even by the company, it won't be, because of like plot will be a part of it, and association with the name will be a part of it, but because of the characteristics, the fact that it interacts with DNS and it's backwards compatible, and the ability you can own it. Some of the things some of the thoughts that I've had on those. In terms of intellectual property and IP, like that is one and the same. In terms of that, it's gonna be, that's where the platforms are also gonna have a big responsibility, right? It's going to be, we give you autonomy as a user who owns your identity. We are going to provide features to you that make us, the most attractive platform to you. We're also going to provide a certain level of compliance and regulatory, levels here that are also going to attract you, right? Like, you don't go to, some people, right, like go to cities that party all night and that you're allowed to be at a bar until 5 a.m. because you're allowed to be at a bar until 5 a.m. And some people don't go to those jurisdictions also because it doesn't cater to their personality. They don't want to have bars open at 5 a.m. And so jurisdictions, right, digital marketplaces will start to have different rules and regulations, and people will choose, which one they want to operate into, but they'll be able to have more choice and autonomy rather than, I chose Instagram 12 years ago. Now I have 5 million followers. Those 5 million followers pay my bills. Now Instagram changed the whole rules, all the rules of the game, and I'm stuck there because my username is on Instagram, right? And hopefully the user will have a little bit more autonomy, right? The way that a passport lets you enter different countries. Of course, countries have different rules and laws, but at least you can pass through their ports, right? That's the idea in most cases, because your identity travels with you. Now, Colin, I already know we can talk for the next 6 hours. I want to have a little bit of fun here. We have flipped a few names ourselves. I personally am a huge fan of emojis. One of those reasons is because I don't think you can really IP me for an emoji, but it can definitely like represent something.
Yeah.
What you said, you were like, one of the earlier trends was emojis. We don't have to talk specifically about emojis, but what are some of the, you have been very analytical. I've read your blog in the past about names, about the trends. Which one, what trends do you think there was something to them? What trends do you think were just like a one-off thing? Which ones do you think we're going to use this again? What are your thoughts?
No, great question. And man, that's a great point about sort of the like non-enforceable IP of emoji. That was one of the things that really made it make sense to me, because you've got, and I should have boned up before this interview, but it's the oh gosh, Alex, who's the council that is it the Unicode Council that it's the Unicode Consortium, I think.
Yes.
So you've got, Apple, Samsung, Microsoft, all the players who are saying like, we put money into this standard, but none of those guys can sue you for selling, dot smiley face the way that they could still sue you for selling dot Samsung, or that they could try to anyway. So that's one of those things that really, it's like and in a similar vein, certainly not as popular in terms of Handshake secondary market results so far. But I, for a similar reason, really like geographical names, because, you've got the name of a city or a state or a vacation destination or whatever. And they've got a local chamber of commerce, they've got businesses, they've got real estate agents, they've got all these people that are investing money into the brand essentially of that location. And so far as I'm aware, I'm not a lawyer and hope I don't get put to the test on this necessarily, but like, that's, if I buy Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is where I live, like Cambridge can't come after me the same way that Samsung can come after me, or an actual company. And you can't, I mean, there are geo names that are trash just like anything else. But I think for places that have high tourism, active real estate markets, whatever, I really, really like, that category. I think that you were kind of talking toward this point a little bit before, that it's going to be fewer as opposed to many TLDs that are, very prominent. And I don't know that I, like, no offense to .c or or any single letter, but like rarity in and of itself doesn't, knock my socks off really. There's been some good commentary on Twitter recently about two-letter .coms, and there are only, somebody should check my math on this, but there are only whatever 700 or 800 of them out in the world. But like, who gives a shit? Because some of them are just like two fucking letters. So what's the point? Pardon me, but like it's I do think that short dictionary words, and maybe some of them are domain hacks where it's something like beach, but I don't think that's going to be like top of the market. But things I think that it's going to be fewer as opposed to many, but the X factor in that is that what's the market out there for people who aren't necessarily trying to sell SLDs but want to build on a TLD, or maybe want to build on a TLD and issue SLDs to their users or subscribers, the same way that we've seen some some make the effort to so far. But I think that like that's, and this has been borne out. I don't have the chops, frankly, to quantify this, but just anecdotally, it seems like that's been kind of what's bearing out in the secondary market, and that's not shocking that you've got like a flight to quality in any sort of more distressed climate. So that makes sense, but I do personally, and I'm biased in this because I own some, but like with the emoji, I was always of the mindset that if somebody's going to buy a single emoji, typo squatting and things like that are such a issue with like leakage in the ICANN world. If you're going to have a single emoji, you probably want the double emoji too. And well, a lot of people like triple anything, rule of threes. So somebody else might try to do something with the triple emoji. Well, if you're going to get the triple, get the quad, and like round it out with the 5. So I haven't been able to do that with all the emoji where I got the single. I've tried to, but I in some cases just couldn't get the set complete. But I do think if there's any sort of residual popularity in terms of that subclass, that it would make sense for like any kind of commercial use for any of those TLDs. I just think it would make defensive sense to have the duplicates and the triplicates and stuff like that. But it's a little bit of a crazy. I've been surprised every time I go onto Namebase and look at the sold list. I'm surprised on both ends of the spectrum in terms of, wow, somebody sold this for way low, or somebody sold this for like, how'd they get that? Like, man, I'd pay 15% for him to broker some for me. And it's a little bit hard to get my head around. And the same dynamic happens as far as the offerers. I think that I don't blame anybody, but I think everybody wants to, like, buy when there's blood on the streets is, a pretty well-known quote at this point. So I think people have really internalized that and, are expecting more blood in the process. So it's a little bit, honestly, kind of dire in the secondary market. But I do think that, single word technology related terms that are relevant, particularly to people who are currently interested in this ecosystem. Emoji have slowed down a little bit, but honestly, I wonder if a part of that is the fewer people have been submitting them to the Flamingo auctions, because that's been such a primary forum or venue to see them sold. But that's kind of there. I'm hopeful that in the long term, there will be some interest in your kind of like two-word industrial or consumer terms. But I just don't know, honestly. And I think that might be a little bit of a pipe dream, if I'm being honest, that, even in the ICANN world, the rules of the road in terms of optimization or whatever are different now. And those seem to have had, diminishment in value in that world. So I don't know how much hope there is with Handshake. I also just can't resist sometimes. So that's been something that I have, focused on, at least in part, with like, oyster farm, power plant, whatever. Like, I'm a simpleton at core, I guess. Like there are a lot of those people spend a lot of money. I want to own that name and see what I can do with it in the future. But it's honestly kind of tough to predict right now. I am happy to see that the secondary market, at least in HNS terms, on Namebase has recovered in the last couple months. After I think it was April, that was a pretty paltry month down into the like 850,000 HNS. But things have been back up into the 1.5 to 2 million HNS after that. And I know that some of that is, people wash sales or people transferring money or whatever, but whatever, it's still directional. So I still think it's relevant to look at the month over month.
Yeah. On that last part, I think Namebase's increase in the in the fee was probably a good move to see. I think we're going to see more authentic volume for sure in that world, and then even Shake Station's at 5%, which I think is a fair amount, and so we'll see what happens there in those markets, and then and then Flamingo also for a variety of usually donation or something along those lines, right? That it's not like you can just fully exchange it, and then if you want to do it offline, you run some risks. So hopefully authentic. I think there was a good amount of wash trading in the early days that I can remember. Some things just weren't making sense. I remember selling something for a stupid amount and then seeing it go for like $30,000, and I was like, that can't be possible. But okay. In terms of the markets themselves, I think that we are in a really interesting time. Never financial advice at all, but I think that the things are not consistent in terms of pricing because of the market, because the HNS prices tank so much, right? There's no other way to put it, and I'm perfectly okay with that myself, but because of that, and Namebase being the most prominent marketplaces doesn't have dynamic pricing. And so what I was looking at a video that I made in 2021 of Niami, and I remember seeing some emojis there, and the fact that they were like 1,000, they were all like 1,000 HNS, and that was like a lot of money. And now if I saw a single emoji for for 3,000 HNS, I wouldn't even flinch. Doesn't matter what it is. So those things all take into effect in terms of the emojis. I never cared. I always thought they were kind of cool because I have family in other countries, and I would travel. I traveled in Europe a lot, and I remember that they would convey meaning no matter what. Right? I would save somebody's phone number, and we didn't really know each other that well, but I would put an emoji next to them, and it conveyed so much meaning. And then the early obsession with them on Handshake made me rethink everything, because I was like, I can read a name. I would, as a new person in domainers, I would read a name and I'd be like, what does it convey to me? What does it convey to me, right? Is it in English, right? And then I would see an emoji, and then boom, no questions asked. It was immediately like I was feeling something, right? On a universal level. So, and away from the IP. So I think that they'll have a comeback, at least as a collector's item, if nothing else. I think it's very unlikely that that's all they will be, but I think that they would be something big. In terms of being able to own multiples of the same one, I couldn't agree with you more. There's only one that I've really been able to do a lot of that with, and I think it's worth it. I'll die on that hill if I have to. I think it's like I wouldn't give it up. There's one I haven't been able to obtain the triple of it, which drives me bananas, but I know who owns it and they know what it's worth, so it's a nightmare. But that's a personal battle. But also seeing somebody knowing what it's worth gives me hope that some of these things are being sold for way too little. If a CryptoPunk can go for what they did in 2018, then there might be something here. Not just on like, oh, I'm going to make a bunch of money. Like there just must be something here, right? Other collector's items, the 100-year-old piece of cast iron can be worth something though. Right. Something's gotta be here. So we'll see what goes on there. In terms of the names, I agree with you. Single dictionary names going to be big. And then in terms of other domains, until NamesCon, I did not realize how much hype goes into domains. You could have had mouse. I'm looking at my mouse. I'm looking at my desk, right? Mouseai.com, and people would have freaked at NamesCon this year. And AI is half the stuff. 80% of the stuff in the market that is throwing AI at the end of it is not AI, and it doesn't matter. We're just in a hype train of AI at the moment, and that's the reality of it. So I think trends are really important. Something that at least I picked up when it comes to buying and selling domains is that trends probably will not last forever. I might still be obsessed with emojis. Handshake is not currently obsessed with emojis, right? Like by any means, I'm the one buying them all from what I've seen. Like when I look at like the the daily, I'm like, oh, that was me. 800 HNS. Like nobody else thought that was worth it. But yeah, we'll see how those markets go. Definitely trendy, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any kind of any you had some numbers on overall volume. I wasn't privy to those. Any other like final kind of thoughts on those on the market, secondary market? Maybe, you said you have no predictions, but I don't believe you. I feel like you gotta have something. What are you feeling? What are you thinking?
I mean, I think we're it seems like, and we're in the position, right, where Handshake doesn't necessarily determine its own future, because it's so dependent on the direction of how other things are doing. And that's just, I don't love that, but like that's just the way it is right now. Things aren't really fully decoupled from Bitcoin, and Bitcoin isn't, it is in some ways, but it isn't in some ways decoupled from overall economic forces. And, people just have kind of the risk on, risk off mentality. I do tend to think that I'm not as dire toward the overall economy in the US and I guess globally as maybe some commentators are. I tend to be a little bit more optimistic, and the fact that the CPI print was a lot lower this month was not surprising to me, just because in your real estate too, like the way CPI stats get collected, if there's a 5% inflation event in 1 month, next 11 prints are going to show that same number. So like it's anyway. I tend to be a little bit less dire about what's happening broadly, even while acknowledging that there's a lot of scary and crazy stuff going on in the world right now in a lot of facets. But I do think that we're seeing some signs of crypto resiliency, that the bottom is not, I think, as low as some people thought it would be. The price of HNS is really going to be, I think, informative for how things go. And I don't, some of the conversations that have been happening around, fork proposals or things like that are very dire and going to zero. And I'm not saying those conversations shouldn't happen. I think they're really important, but I worry about the tenor and sort of forced urgency, perhaps, of some of them, and some of the claims I've seen with people who have contributed products to the Handshake community saying, like, if this fork doesn't happen, I'm gone. Like, I think that's when that same person is saying, I'm not doing this for the money, that makes all my reflex go up. So I think that like some of the things that are playing out right now are really going to be indicative, whether that's kind of macroeconomic level factors, whether that's kind of crypto level factors, and a lot of that's the regulatory action that's happening right now, or whether that's even Handshake level factors that are going on in terms of products that are getting introduced, proposals to change the course of the protocol, whatever. But I generally tend to be bullish. I guess I wouldn't be here if I weren't, and maybe that's a sign of my naivete or something worse. But I generally tend to be bullish in terms of remainder of 2023. I think that we've bottomed out. I think that we've kind of experienced the shock, and a lot of what happens forward from here is going to be is going to be a byproduct of, and we probably don't have time to get into this tonight, but like how Handshake positions itself relative to the ever-growing field of peers, if you will, who are introducing decentralized blockchain. And I think that there are some of those that one would be ill-advised to not take seriously, like Ethereum name service. Like, they're big, they're the real deal. They, I might hate Brantley's guts, but like they still are, they're the real deal. They've got more secondary action than Handshake, by an order of magnitude. Even if some of that is, like bubble oriented, numbers clubs or whatever. it's still there. I take a much different attitude toward like unstoppable domains, and we know each other on Twitter, so you're probably familiar with that. But I think that it's important. David Vorik did a nice talk at HandyCon, and I appreciate that he did this because sometimes it's not a popular sentiment, but he talked about the Handshake ecosystem and lava. I interpreted it as don't be a dick. And, that's fair. I think that that's really fair. And to that point, I think that I don't have enough information to call unstoppable domains a scam. I do have enough information to say that the way that they've reported their sales figures are highly misleading, that some of their corporate communication has indicated patterns that would cause suspicion in reasonable people. And I guess that's some of what as I've been frankly not that public in my thoughts with Handshake more recently, that's a lot of what I've been struggling with, because I think that David has a good point that lava is not necessarily the most constructive thing. And I have grimaced, upon seeing, I don't think you should just say baseless things. I don't think you should I think Handshake we can't police this really, because it's a decentralized community made up of, autonomous individuals. But it bums me out when I see people talking about people's appearances or things you don't need to get into bullying type stuff in order to prove a point. I do think it's relevant to say, hey, this statement that a corporate employee of a competing project made about Handshake is inaccurate. And I maybe foolishly seem to be putting a lot of effort into that department more recently. I'll let you know later if it ends up being constructive or not, but that's without catastrophizing the situation. I do think there's kind of a battle going on right now in terms of perception and perception becoming reality. And I think that that's going to be very indicative of the path that Handshake takes in adoption and in proceeds from secondary market sales and any other metric that people want to look at. So I know I swung wide on that answer, but that kind of perception angle is an important thing in my mind. And it's important to note that Handshake has done well in that regard and continues to overshoot unstoppable domains. Unstoppable domains, and it's a different animal. UD isn't name base, and I think sometimes that gets fuzzy in people's mind. I know you know that, but UD raised 65 mil at $1 billion valuation, and Handshake domains outsell unstoppable domains on the secondary market. So my role is to keep repeating that, essentially, if I do nothing else, because that's not lava in my mind. That's facts and setting the record straight in the face of some pretty hostile communication, purposefully from some adversarial parties.
Yes. Yes. I've by no means I do this for the same thing we talked about much earlier, which is just to kind of just to inspire other people to kind of think out loud and maybe bring some credibility to the role. But when I got it, I've said this before. When I got into Handshake, I made some mistakes, right, and I was a little bit childish. I have grown up with the protocol, if you will, right, and part of that has been bringing a little bit of professionalism into the space because I truly believe, based on my understanding of fundamentals, that when you're already ahead, right, when you already have won in terms of, or when you know you're going to win, there is nothing to be added, right, by acting aggressively towards your opponents. In fact, that's the only opportunity. That's where you give them an opportunity to distract from the actual objective that you're both competing towards, right? Because now they get to say you're cheating or you're doing something malicious, right? Instead of sticking to the game. Stick to the game. Handshake will win based on properties and characteristics alone. Very intelligent people who built it, who had a lot of trust. They had so much trust in the technology that they let it go. If
Right.
that is not a pretty baller move, then I don't know another one that would be out there,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, definitely. But to your point, can't be policed, can't be controlled. Something that can be, you by sticking to the facts is something that can definitely help advocate for other people sticking to the facts, and
Yeah.
me trying to focus on what positives there are, can hopefully inspire people to focus on the positive. If they want to spend an hour creating a trash meme to make some people upset, then that is a choice. I hope I'm winning TLDs while they're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So for this one, Colin, I think we're going to be hanging out in the future for sure, at least digitally until we hang out in person. I think we're going to wrap this one up.
Sounds
Final
good.
final thoughts. I think hopefully maybe we nudged you into working a little bit more on the blog. But we'll be seeing you, if not at least on Twitter. Links will be down in the bio, or the description of this video. But Colin is active on Twitter. He follows me. I follow him. He has put out a blog in the past, and we're gonna dust it off and get a bunch more regularity there. That's my nudge. And I can't thank you enough for joining me, sir, for doing everything that you've done for the community so far. And I'm looking forward to a bright handy future.
Oh, Alex, thanks so much for having me on and for doing the series. And I really appreciate it. You're a great host, and I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, everyone, we're signing off. Now we have Penny. Squeaky disappeared. I don't know what happened there. Maybe you guys saw it during the episode. But check out all the other conversations in the dWeb chats, and if there's somebody else you want to see on the channel, please recommend them. Shout them out. Get them on here so we can talk about all sorts of things. All right, signing off.